TCU adds 2 more coaches to their coaching staff.
You are Locked On Horned Frogs, your daily podcast on the TCU Horned Frogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That's right, Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. I'm your host, Steven Simcox. I'm covering TCU athletics for the past 12 seasons. Thanks for making Locked On Horned Frogs your first listen. TCU women's basketball, they took down Arizona State on Wednesday night. We'll get into that later on in the show. We'll also talk some men's basketball coming off that big upset of number 10 Texas Tech. But we start today with the news that TCU made 2 more big additions to their coaching staff. And one of the additions is a name you might recognize. It's an ad that I really like. TCU football adds Josh Bookbinder to their coaching staff. Josh Bookbinder comes over from Texas Tech, where he coached inside linebackers for the past 3 seasons. That famous Texas Tech defense, right? But in all seriousness, Josh did a nice job there. He really did a good job of producing some good players. This is from Matt Zenitz from 247 Sports. TCU is set to hire Josh Bookbinder as a defensive assistant. He was Texas Tech's inside linebackers coach for the last 3 seasons, helped Jacob Rodriguez earn first-team All-Big 12 honors in 2024, and Ben Roberts become Big 12 Freshman of the Year in 2023. Now, Josh was a casualty of Tim DeRuyter. Texas Tech changed their offensive coordinator and their defensive coordinator this past offseason. So with that departure, Josh also left. TCU picks him up as an assistant to the linebackers. Ken Wilson is your linebackers coach. And it's a trend that it's been going on this offseason with Sonny Dykes. He's adding a lot of on-the-field support to his staff. They now have 24 on-field coaches. And I'm curious to hear, like, from some former players. So I know some former players listen to this program frequently, and some of them probably laugh or kind of roll their eyes when they hear that number, and they just think, man, that's so many people. What is everyone on the staff doing? And this is not the first time TCU has had a big staff. In fairness, last season they had a big coaching staff, and I talked a lot about how that was a good thing because they were following a model that had become popular among college football. A lot of the additions they made were in the analyst role. So they famously went and got Dana Holgorsen, who had just parted ways with Houston, had been let go from the Cougars job. And Sonny Dykes hired him. And he also hired Todd Graham. And he had this interesting idea that Dana talked about where Dana was going to work with the defense. He was going to do advanced scouting for Andy Avalos. He was going to work on scouting offenses that TCU was going to play throughout the season. So getting a feel for what they're doing schematically, what kind of tendencies they have. But he was also going to evaluate the TCU defense on a regular basis and see what tendencies Andy Avalos was showing as a play caller, see what tendencies they had with their personnel, and try to predict, like, okay, here's how offenses are going to attack you. As an experienced offense coach myself, this is what I would do in these situations. Well, we know now that that did not work, right? Like, that experiment was failed. Dana, depending on how much you think he was involved in the process, the one game that I really thought he could be super helpful in was the Houston game, even though Houston had a ton of roster turnover because of the transfer portal and because of the coaching change. That wasn't really the case. And it was a defense that was going through their first season. You had a lot of those typical first season growing pains, but in the middle of the year, Dana took off and went to Nebraska because he had the chance to be a play caller there, and that's what he's going to be now. He's going to be the OC for Matt Rule for the Cornhuskers. And he said before the season, he was like, look, I can do all this stuff remotely, basically. Like, everything I'm doing is just sort of breaking down tape on a laptop. I don't need to be in the building. I can sort of set my own schedule to a certain extent. And that ended up being the truth because when he had the opportunity to leave, he did that. So I don't think that experiment worked very well. Todd Graham, I really can't speak to how much of an influence he had. He's a defensive-minded coach who was an analyst and was working with the offense, was working with Kendall Browse and Sonny Dykes on, okay, here's what I'm seeing from you guys. Here's what I'm seeing from opposing defenses and what they could attack in the future. But it didn't work very well. Now, that approach to a coaching staff is something that Nick Saban did for years. It's something that Kirby Smart's done. Nick Saban had almost like coaching rehab, right? If a former head coach got fired somewhere, it didn't work out, he was very eager to get them on staff, have them work in an analyst role. Kirby Smart's done similar things. So he's sort of following that model. It didn't pan out. The thing I like about what they're doing this offseason, all these additions are on the field coaches. So they're going to have a more direct impact on what TCU is doing on a day-to-day basis. AJ Ricker, the offensive line coach, he's getting some help now from Randy Clements, who is super experienced in the offensive line world and has worked with Kendall Briles in the past. So he's coming on staff in this assistant offensive line coach role, but he's going to be able to hit the ground running and do what he needs to do. He's going to be a great help to AJ Ricker. In similar fashion, with Josh Bookbinder, you have a very experienced coach who's coming over from Texas Tech, knows what it looks like to run your position groups there, and can be a sounding board and a helpful piece for Ken Wilson. And, Ken Wilson's been around for a long time, but this gives them more eyeballs on the situation. Now, I think you can kind of look at this two ways. You can say, man, that's a really bloated coaching staff. Is everybody going to contribute? Is everyone going to have something to say, do their job? Or are there too many voices, too many cooks in the kitchen? But I like that in this particular go-around, they're going after people who are going to be in a non-field role. Another addition they made, Cedric Williams, assistant defensive line coach. He completed playing football in 2023 at Houston, and he worked the 2024 season as a defensive line assistant at Troy. So this is more in the mold of what you would typically see from a spot like this, kind of a GA role, a young coach who is trying to earn some experience, add to his resume, get some tips from an experienced coach. There's a good mix here in these, assistant positional coach roles of people that have been around the block and have done this for a long time and understand what they're bringing to the table, how they can help, and also young guys who can add some energy, enthusiasm, and it's helpful for them as they sort of add to their resume and learn the coaching ropes and get acclimated to what that looks like. But the biggest positive to me is those analyst roles, yes, they were in vogue for a long time, and they're still going to be a huge part of college football. But Dana Holgorsen and Todd Graham, even though they were the idea of using their mind and their veteran experience and watching film and breaking things down was intriguing. At the same time, they weren't going to be playing on Saturdays, right? They weren't going to be super involved in the week-to-week game plan. So it was hard to see tangibly what their impact was and how they were helping the team. This is much more hands-on. It's, hey, we have people here that are doing the job and they're working with these players on a day-to-day basis. They're giving input. They're helping this coaching staff grow and develop and get where they need to be. That, in my mind, is a lot more appealing from a coaching standpoint, having these people on the field with the ability to work with the players, build relationships with them. And, Josh Bookbinder did a really good job developing linebackers at Texas Tech. Now he gets to bring that experience to TCU. He's also someone who's been in the Big 12. He got to watch – I'm sure he was mainly focused on the offense last year, but he got to watch this team up close and personal. So 24 on-the-field coaches, that's a lot. And that's not counting your support staff, which is your player personnel guys, your scouting department, but also the people that are involved in the day-to-day with recruiting, right? He brought in Aaron Green, legendary TCU running back, who's going to be more on the recruiting side of things and will help with that staff. Sonny has made it pretty clear where he wants to allocate his resources. He wants a lot of help within the coaching ranks. And people that probably aren't big fans of Sonny, I imagine will look at that and be like, well, yeah, because he can't do the job. I think it's a good admission, of like, all right, we need some more eyeballs here. And yeah, it could, if it doesn't work well, then it could end up being a situation where you got too many people involved. But I think the positive here is going to be just the ability to have more hands-on interaction with the players, with the people that you're adding on the staff, instead of some dude in the booth who's watching up top and is trying to make an impact by, just scouting on a week-to-week basis. These are people that are going to be in the trenches with the current coaching staff, working with these players and trying to help them develop their talents and develop their skills and make more of an impact on Saturday. So Josh Bookbinder from Texas Tech, he comes on as an assistant linebackers coach, and then Cedric Williams comes over from Troy, and he will be your assistant defensive line coach as TCU continues to round out this coaching staff. And I would think that would be about it for the additions, at least from an on-the-field perspective. When we come back, TCU women's basketball, another victory on Wednesday. They take down Arizona State. We'll talk about that next year on Locked On Horned Frogs, your team every day. Do you hear about NIL and it just confuses you? Or you're like, man, that seems like something that fans are removed from, that they're not involved with? Well, I got some good news for you. The future of college sports is here, and it's transparent. It's brought to you by Roy. Before the Roy app, NIL negotiations often happened under the table, and fans didn't have a clear way to directly support the athletes they love. Now with Roy, you get to be a part of the change and support your school in the most transparent way possible. Roy, the NIL app, allows you to choose the player you want to support, decide how much to contribute, receive exclusive content from the athletes you back. The best part, if your player transfers, you get your money back. It's a risk-free way to show your support. The Roy app is giving fans control. No more uncertainty. Now you can provide transparent, impactful support and help shape the team and the future of college sports with your contributions. Download the Roy app today from the App Store and start backing TCU athletes in the way they deserve, with transparency, trust, and a real impact. This is the future of college sports. Join it now by downloading Roy and supporting your favorite players. Roy, you can donate to these players directly. It goes straight to them. Download the Roy app today in the App Store or on Google Play. TCU women's basketball, they went on the road to Arizona State and defeated the Sun Devils 82-66. Madison Connor was the high scorer in this one. She ended up with 22 points. She had 0 points at halftime. And, man, when she gets going from a shooting standpoint, it's special to watch. She had a run with about 4 minutes left in that ball game where she hit 3 threes. TCU was kind of struggling to score. Arizona State had cut the lead from 17-9, and Frogs were still in control, but it was a moment where, all right, you can either really take hold of this game or it's going to get kind of dicey here in these last few minutes, and you have to really work. And Madison Connor hit a couple threes and just put the game out of reach. Frogs win, and they continue to impress with their ability to just take care of business. Like, this team, the losses they have, the 2 losses they have in conference play against Kansas State and Oklahoma State, they're frustrating because both games felt winnable. Like, in the case of Oklahoma State, they had a big lead, and they just kind of melted down the stretch. In the case of the Kansas State game, Kansas State was without Aoka Lee, one of their star players. Yeah, it was on the road, but K-State kind of threw some traps and some ball pressure at them, and TCU didn't have a great feel for how to handle it. But that being said, they've bounced back since then. And in all these games against teams that are sort of in the middle or towards the bottom of the Big 12, they've done an incredible job just handling their business, not allowing anybody to sneak up on them and get an upset. And it's why they're in the driver's seat. In case you missed it, they got 3 games left now. If they go 3-0, they win the Big 12 regular season title. There's a lot of different scenarios that can play out. Baylor is tied with them right now in first place. Kansas State and West Virginia are right behind on their heels. And TCU plays, they play a tough schedule. They play West Virginia at home this Sunday. They play Baylor on the road in the season finale. So it's not going to be easy. And Baylor right now looks like the hottest team in the country. They took down Colorado by a big margin on the road on Wednesday night. They've won, I think, 7 in a row. But at this point in the year, really all you can ask for is a chance to control your own destiny, right? Like have the opportunity to go win games. And if you win them, you don't have to worry about help. You don't have to worry about somebody else upsetting someone. It's just, hey, if we win the game, we win the title. And that's the scenario that TCU has put themselves in. A huge game against West Virginia on Sunday. West Virginia's coming off a win in Morgantown against Kansas State. Really happy that game's in Shalimar Arena and not on the road, but still going to be a tough test. You have to take this one game at a time. But the one that they had last night, they played really well. Sedona Prince had 17 points. And they're still getting good contributions. As the year has gone on, this rotation has started to fill out. Donovan Hunter got the start tonight in place of Taylor Bigby, who had been doing some good things as well. And Donovan played at a really high level. She ended up with 10 points in the ball game, and she had a block. She had a couple steals, 3 rebounds, but 7 assists. So from that point guard spot, was distributing the basketball well. Also, when called upon, got her own shot and did a little bit of everything, stuffed the stat sheet on Wednesday night. Donovan is a great defender. She came over from Oregon State in the offseason, and I like her at that starting point guard spot. I feel like she does a nice job in the pick and roll, distributing the bigs, finding open players. One thing that needs to change as they close out the regular season here, Haley Van Lith is struggling right now. She only had 10 points in this ballgame against Arizona State, 4-14. I mean, you can see it. Every time she touches the ball, there's just so much attention on her. Teams are gunning for her. They're trying to, be physical with her, get her off her spot, not allow her to drive the lane, and also just force her to distribute the basketball. And she struggled in the last few weeks to really make plays and be a scoring threat. If this team's going to make a deep run, as much as I love what they've gotten lately from Taylor Bigby, from Donovan Hunter, from some of the other bench players who have come in, Haley Van Lith has to be a big part of this. If they're going to beat big-time teams in the NCAA tournament, then she needs to have big games. So that has to change as the season goes on and kind of comes into focus here. But right now they're doing a good job of, even with her kind of struggling to find her shot and score, they're still right there. And she had a couple shots that just rimmed out Wednesday, got a good look at a 3, just didn't fall. A couple mid-range jumpers where, she did her traditional pull-up jumper. Didn't happen. I like where this team is at. If you're curious, so the NCAA now, they drop the top 16 teams, basically the top 4 seeds in each region. TCU in the first projection was a 3 seed in South Carolina's region, which, I mean, no matter what 1 seed you play, it's going to be a tough matchup. Obviously, TCU played South Carolina earlier this regular season, and that did not go well. They struggled, right? But that's a tough matchup for sure. The thing that bothered me about it, the team above them, the 2 seed, was NC State. Now, NC State, I know they took a loss about a week ago, so it might change. But TCU beat NC State earlier this season. That was months ago. It was at the beginning of the year, and it was at home. But TCU's got a good resume. I mean, they got a win against NC State. They have a win against Notre Dame, who's currently number 1 in the country. That was on a neutral floor, but they got it done. They won that game. And, I mean, their only losses this season, they're 25-3. Their only losses, South Carolina, one of the best teams in the country, Kansas State and Oklahoma State, who were both really solid ranked teams, and those games were on the road. So, I mean, they have an outstanding resume that they can tout and put up against anybody. It's just a matter of continuing to win and continuing to do it on a consistent basis. Nice victory, though, against Arizona State. The TCU men coming off that win against Texas Tech on Tuesday. I was talking to Isaac Shade, who hosts Locked On College Basketball, and I was like, hey, look, can you just give me some insight on what you feel like this does for their tournament chances? Because as TCU people, that felt like a huge deal for us. It on the surface, it appears like that should be something that at least catapults them into the conversation a little bit more. He said they haven't made it quite to the bubble conversation yet, but the good news is they don't have any quad 3 or quad 4 losses. The low computer numbers hurt, like the net ranking, which is still in the 70s. But there's some winnable games to wrap up the regular season. Keep building on that 3-game win streak while their teams fall apart, and who knows, they could play themselves into it. I'm still holding out hope. I mean, I know it's not the Big 12 that it used to be, but 12-8 in conference and a decent showing at the Big 12 tournament, which 12-8 would require you to go 4-1 down the stretch, which with this team is not an easy task. 12-8 in conference play and a win or two in the conference tournament should be a really good resume. Like, it should stack up against just about anybody. So I'm hopeful that's the case and that the committee sees that when it comes into focus here. But to do that, TCU's got to keep taking care of business. And that starts with a road game against Cincinnati at 11 a.m. They also got a big matchup against Baylor at home. They'll play West Virginia on the road, which would be a quad one win because it's a road game against a good team. That's always a tough place to play. And UCF and Colorado also on the schedule. They got blitzed by UCF and Orlando. Have to rectify that and also need to find a way to get a victory against a Colorado team that's struggled mightily so far this season. We'll come back, get some of your thoughts, wrap things up. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team. We do it here every day. TCU baseball, really good opening weekend, 4-0 to start the season, and the schedule gets tougher as they go to Globe Life for that typical beginning of the season tournament that they've been in lately. They play Michigan Friday at 3 p.m., Arkansas on Saturday at 6 p.m., and then Kansas State at 3 p.m. on Sunday afternoon. So competition will ramp up. Really curious to see this lineup against better pitching. They showed some serious pop in that series against San Diego. I believe they had 11 home runs. Isaac Cadena was driving out of the park. Noah Franco had 2 in that Saturday afternoon game. Or maybe it was Sunday. It was one of those games. You guys know what I'm talking about. Had 2 just mammoth home runs in that ball game. So showed some real power. Now, can you do that against better pitching staffs? That's going to be a huge question for this TCU team as they start to round into form and get closer to the stretch run of the season. Still very, very early, but liked what I saw from the starting pitching, liked what I saw from the bats, and in particular, the power they showed. I mentioned TCU tennis on Wednesday's show. That national championship indoor match was still going on while I was recording. Unfortunately, they did fall to Wake Forest by a score of 4-3. They lost the doubles point, and Jack Pennington-Jones, it came down to court 1 in 3 sets. He fell. So still a really solid showing in that indoor tournament by TCU tennis. They've been in that final for, I believe, 4 straight years now. Davey Roditi doing a great job. They're set up really well for the outdoor season. Disappointing that they couldn't find a way to get it done in that national championship match. But, man, again, just as solid of a program as you're going to come across with the consistency they've shown on a week-in and week-out basis. Some thoughts from yesterday's episode. Jacob Langford says heartbroken for TCU tennis. They were very close, but what a win for TCU hoops. Yeah, huge win for them against Texas Tech. Off Track said, I'm going to go out on a limb here. We have a backup kicker or a possible punter. Punting was atrocious and kicking game was difficult to watch at times. I know he's young and I'm sure he'll kill it this year. But our backup kicker at the portal, punting, however, was mediocre. Maybe not a big deal, but it was an obvious issue last year. Yeah, it is a big deal. I mean, I said at some point last season, if this team was better on special teams, it might help them win a few games because so many of these games were close and were on the margins. Kyle Limmerman's going to be your kicker. I think he's going to do fine. I was disappointed that he didn't come in and right away he wasn't better. But, even at a spot like that where you just kind of assume there's not a big learning curve, it is a huge change. And so hopefully he's more comfortable this year and he can step into that role with more confidence and kick at a high level. From a punting perspective, I think they'll stick with Ethan Craw. And I thought he did an okay job last year. It's one of those things field position, you don't think about it much, but it can make a huge difference in a ball game, especially if you have an offense that is struggling to put together drives at times. And TCU, even though I think their offense is going to be good, they do have lulls where it's just not always super consistent. So hopefully that's something they can get worked out. But when you do have to punt, flipping the field can be a big thing. And if you can pin teams deep in their own territory, that helps your defense. That's playing complementary football. So, yeah, special teams is a huge part of this. And it's not something that everybody locks in on and notices, but it's very important when we talk about how good this team can be and what they can do moving forward. We'll be back tomorrow to close out the week. TCU men's women's basketball games this weekend. The men take on Cincinnati on Saturday. The women take on West Virginia on Sunday. And we'll still have plenty of football coverage and baseball coverage as well. It's Locked On Horned Frogs, your team. We do it here every day. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel or on your favorite podcast platform.